boys and girls, so we're back to our novel, Roald Dahl, Dolly, Champion of the World, and I have got chapter 6, Mr. Victor Hazel. The following Friday, while we were having supper in the caravan, my father said, "If it's all right with you, Danny, I'll go out again tonight." "You mean poaching?" Yes. Will it be Hazel's Wood again?" "It's always be Hazel's Wood," he said. "First, because that's where all the pheasants are, and second, because I don't like Mr. Hazel one little bit. It's a pleasure to poach his birds." I must pause here to tell you a little bit more about Mr. Victor Hazel. He is a brewer of beer, and he owned a huge brewery. He was rich beyond words, and his property stretched for miles along either side of the valley. All the land around us belonged to him. Everything on both sides of the road except a small patch of ground on which our filling station stood. The patch belonged to my father. It was a little island in the middle of a vast ocean of Mr. Victor Hazel's estate. Mr. Victor Hazel was a roaring snob, and he tried desperately to get in with what he believed the right kind of people. He hunted with hounds and gave shooting parties and wore fancy waistcoats, and every week he drove his enormous silver Rolls Royce past our filling station on his way to the brewery. As he flashed by, you would sometimes catch a glimpse of his great glistening beery face above the wheel, pink as ham, all softened and inflamed from drinking far too much beer. "No," my father said, "I do not like Mr. Hazel one little bit. I've forgotten the way he spoke to me. I haven't forgotten the way he spoke to me last year when he came in for a fill-up." I hadn't forgotten it either. Mr. Hazel had pulled up alongside the pumps in his glistening Rolls Royce, and he said to me, "Fill her up and look sharp about it." I was 8 years old at the time. He didn't get out the car, he just handed me the keycap and the petrol tank. As he did so, he barked out, "And get your filthy little hands to yourself." "You don't understand." I didn't understand at all. "What do you mean, sir?" There was a leather riding crop on the seat beside him, and he picked it up and pointed at me like a pistol. "If you make any dirty finger marks on my paintwork, I'll step out of this car and give you a good hiding." My father was out the workshop almost before Mr. Hazel had finished speaking. He strode up to the window of the car and placed his hands on the sill and leaned in. "I don't like you speaking to my son like that," he said, and his voice was dangerously soft. Mr. Hazel did not look at him. He sat quite still on the seat of his Rolls Royce. His tiny piggy eyes staring straight ahead. His smug, superior little smile around the corners of his mouth. "You have no reason to threaten him," my father went on. "He had done nothing wrong." Mr. Hazel continued to act as though my father wasn't there. "The next time you threaten someone with a good hiding, I suggest you pick on someone your own size," my father said. "Like me, for instance." Mr. Hazel did not move. "Now go away, please," my father said. "We do not wish to serve you." He took the key from my hand and he tossed it through the window, and the Rolls Royce drove away fast in a cloud of dust. The very next day, an inspector from the local Department of Health arrived, and he said he'd come to inspect our caravan. What did you want to inspect our caravan for?" my father asked. "To see if this is a fit place for humans to live," the man said. "We don't allow people to live in dirty, broken down shacks these days." My father showed him the inside of the caravan, which was spotlessly clean as always and as cosy as could be, and in the end the man had to admit there was nothing wrong with it. Soon after that, another inspector turned up, and this time they took a sample of the petrol from the underground storage tank. My father explained that they were checking up to see if we were mixing some of the second grade petrol with the first grade stuff, which is an old dodge practice in crooked filling stations owners. Of course, we were not doing this. Hardly a week went by without some local official dropping in to check with one thing or another, and there was very little doubt, my father said, that this was the long and powerful arm of Mr. Hazel, was reaching out behind the scenes and trying to run us off our land. So all in all, you can see why it gave my father the certain pleasure to poach from Mr. Hazel's pheasants. That night we put the raisins in to soak. The next day was poaching day, and don't think my father didn't know it. From the moment he got out of his bunk in the morning, the excitement began to build up inside him. This was Saturday, so I was home from school, and we spent most of the day in the workshop decarbonising cylinders of Mr. Pritchard's Austin 7. It was a great little car. It was built in 1933, a tiny miracle of a machine that still ran as sweetly as ever, though it was more than 40 years old. My father said that these Austin 7s, better known in their time as baby Austins, were the first successful mini cars ever made. Mr. Pratchett, who owned a turkey farm near Aylesbury, was as proud as could be of this one, and he always brought it into us for repair. Working together, we released a valve and drew out the valves. We released the valve springs and we drew out the valves. We unscrewed the cylinder head nuts and lifted off the head together. We began to scrape the carbon off the inside of the head of the top of the pistons. I want to be away by 6 o'clock, my mother said. Then I'll get into the wood exactly at twilight. Why twilight? I asked. Because at twilight, everything inside the wood becomes veiled and shady. You can move around and it's not easy for someone else to see you. And when danger threatens, you can always hide in the shadows, which are darker than a wolf's mouth. Why don't you wait until it gets really dark? He asked. Then you wouldn't be seen at all. Oh, you wouldn't catch anything like that, he said. When the night comes on, all the pheasants fly up to the trees to roost. Pheasants are just like any other bird. They never sleep on the ground. Twilight, my father added, begins about 7:30 this week, and it's at least half an hour's walk to the wood, and I must not leave here any later than 6. Are you going to use the sticky hat, or will it be the horsehair stopper? I asked. Sticky hat, he said. I'm very fond of the sticky hat. And when will we be back? About 10 o'clock, he said. 10:30 at the latest. I promise I'll be back by 10:30. You're quite sure you don't mind me leaving you alone? Quite sure, I said. But you'll be all right, won't you, Dad? Don't worry about me, he said, putting his arm around the shoulder, giving me a hug. But you said there wasn't a man in your dad's village that didn't get a bit shot up by the keeper sooner or later. Ah, my father said, yes, I did say that, didn't I? But in those days, there were a lot more keepers up in the woods than there are now. And the keepers were behind almost every tree. How many are there in Hazelwood now? Not too many. He said, not too many at all. And as the day wore on, I could see my father getting more and more impatient and excited. By 5 o'clock, he'd finished his work on the baby Austin, and together we ran her up and down the road to test her out. At 5:30, we had an early supper of sausages and bacon. My father hardly ate anything at all. And at 6 o'clock precisely, he kissed me goodbye and said, promise not to wait up for me, Danny. Put yourself to bed at 8 and go to sleep, right? I set off down the road, and I stood on the platform of the caravan watching him go. I loved the way he moved. He had that long, loping stride that all countrymen have, who are used to covering great distances on foot. He was wearing an old navy sweater and an even older cap on his head. He turned round to wave at me, and I waved back. But then he disappeared round the bend in the road. And that was that. That's the chapter finished. And the next chapter is Baby Austin, and I hope you enjoy it. And I'll speak to you soon. Take care and stay safe. Bye.